Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Thunder, and this is Tenor Talks, and it is all things tenor, all things saxophone. And it's with my colleague from Ohio State University, Dr. Robert Brooks. And today's show, start listening to these great musicians now. The sooner the better. The sooner the better. So, we're going to detail our journey, our own listening journey, folks that we dig. Maybe talk about some folks that we're listening to now, and then we're going to kind of go through some usual suspects and some folks that you definitely should know about and should be listening to. So, if you've had some questions about who to listen to, what to listen to, what to listen to for what, any of those kind of questions, and you're just trying to get, and or if you're just trying to get deeper into jazz, today is the show for you. And so, without further ado, Tenor Talks with Dr. Thunder and Dr. Brooks. Let's go. What's happening, sir? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's good to see you.
Good. Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded, we're kind of in that point of the semester, reminded of one of my favorite uh sayings. Former teacher used to say that it's better to be busy than bored. And I certainly am not bored right now. So
Right. Yep. Certainly not bored.
Yeah.
And
So, but no, but it's been good, and excited for all the stuff we have coming up at the university, and performances and things, and all good stuff. So,
yeah, Jeff Coffin is going to be at Ohio State tomorrow. Shout out
yeah,
to Jeff.
Jeff Coffin, and yeah, we've been having a lot of great guests recently, which has been really, really exciting. So,
Yeah, let's see here. Went Marsalis and Lincoln Center Band was there last week, and I just got done playing a concert series with Maria Schneider and the Columbus Jazz Orchestra last week. Is all kind of great stuff, fun stuff.
yeah, absolutely.
Definitely not
I actually,
boring.
no, and I ran into kind of, it was a happenstance meeting, but I ran into Ohio State alumni John Fetchock in the lobby of the building today. He's
Oh
on
yeah,
campus working with the trombone studio, so that was cool to see him again. And we chatted about the Jazz Ensemble's Gen performance, and I'm going to get him a recording of his piece from that. So,
yeah. That was a good moment. That
absolutely.
Gen conference. Uh, Wonderful piece that he wrote for us. I foretell some more commissions in the future.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, it's going to be good.
Awesome. All good
All
stuff for the
right.
program.
So, uh, I guess I'll start, um, and then we'll have you join in. So we're going to talk a little bit about you know the folks that we listen to,
Hmm.
and then maybe a little bit about who we're listening to now, and then we can kind of fill in the holes. And I think there's some good resources for folks that are trying to get deeper in their listening, and folks that are specifically will sort of lean towards saxophone as far as the listening, but that doesn't mean that, of course, those are the only folks that we listen to.
Hmm.
Um, so so I will say that my first big influence was my dad. So that was my first big influence. My dad was a great saxophone player. Um, he's still with us. He just when I really got aggressive about saxophone, which I started young, he no longer felt the need to continue that. I keep saying that I'm going to do this, and I definitely am. I have to carve the time out. Hopefully, I'll have some time this summer to do this. But I have a recording that's over there on the wall. I
Mm.
have it's a cassette tapes. I know nobody knows what cassettes are anymore. That needs to be dated. But I've got some cassette tapes over there, and one of the cassettes is my dad, uh, and he takes a solo. My dad, he really loved Lou Donaldson. He sounds like Lou
Mm.
Donaldson, and I've been saying that I'm going to transcribe that and then
Oh,
like have it framed and give it to him as a gift.
oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
I haven't done it yet, but I am gonna get to that. But my first influence was my dad, and then of course the folks that he really really dug, really was influenced by. My mother played a lot of stuff around the house, a lot of gospel stuff. Um, Johnny Mathis, the Johnny Mathis Christmas record in particular, one of his Christmas records. And last year, I actually got to play with Johnny Mathis, which was
Mm.
crazy. Nat King Cole. Um, let's see here. Andre Crouch. A lot of that kind of stuff was happening around the house, and then Motown and all that kind of stuff was happening around the house. My dad's jazz record collections was great. A lot of Miles Davis in there, which featured Cannonball Adderley and Coltrane in particular. Those records, so like Milestones, that record, I had that on repeat. Um, Sonny Stitt, a lot of Sonny Stitt. My dad really liked Sonny Stitt. Um, and when I was at I started performing when I was pretty young. I started when I was 6. I started performing actually professionally when I was about 9. So, so I was doing a concert with my dad. He was playing piano, and it was like a reception. So taught me a bunch of standards. We played some
Mhm.
standards, and this guy comes up to me. He says, "Oh man," he's like, "you're like a young bird or something like this." He says something like this to me. Then he runs out to his car and runs and comes back to me, and I still have the tape. This cassette tape, Charlie Parker, Dewey Square, the record Dewey
Mm.
Square, and I burned that thing out. I played it over and over and over and over, and listened over and over. Um, and I'll tell you, I actually backed into Parker because my first primary influence, and it still is with me, Sonny Stitt.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I got to college that I really started to dig into Coltrane. Of course, I was listening to Train, but I didn't understand it. I couldn't really process it when I was a kid. And so when I got to college, I really started digging into Train. Now, I'll pause there, and we'll have you share some, and then maybe I'll resume somewhere around college years.
Sure. So yeah, I think, kind of from like an influential standpoint, I was lucky enough to, my grandmother was a music teacher. And so through her, my parents had a lot of music playing, and it wasn't necessarily jazz focused, when I was growing up, but there was a part of it. But I think more than that, it really was, music making was a priority in my family. And so it was something, I think sometimes it's, whether directly or maybe indirectly, is kind of, made to be a less than worthy pursuit for some. And for me, it was kind of pushed in that regard. But neither of my parents are professional musicians, so they both have music experience. I think my dad would, joke that he plays the radio kind of thing. and
Mm-hmm.
but there's kind of, some of that background with my grandmother. And my first kind of memory of something similar, uh I really kind of always had an attraction to playing saxophone specifically. I had played other instruments when I was younger, played piano for a little bit when I was very young, and guitar for my grandmother. Um, but kind of the short version of that story is we had my grandmother knew people that owned a music shop near Pontiac, Michigan. And I'm originally from Southeast Michigan. And I went in, and they had I'm sure like a Bundy alto or something on the wall. And I
High quality.
pointed at it, and I said, "Oh, I want to do that." And I think I was
Mm.
a fifth grade. And my dad was like, "Sure, I believe you." And he said something, I'm sure innocuous at the time, which is like, "Well, if you want to still want to play saxophone in a year, we'll come back and I'll buy you a saxophone." And I like went home and like marked it down. I like wrote
Uh,
down. And a year to the day we came back, and we got it because I was insistent the whole time. It was like, no, 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 that's it. And some of that was from listening to music. Some of that, I don't know. I certainly don't have a memory of the first time I heard a John Coltrane recording or a Charlie Parker recording or something like that. Though I just had always spent a lot of time listening to music, um, and but kind of similar to what you're talking about, I do have the memory of this. So my first saxophone teacher, um, who's now Dr. Damani Phillips, who teaches at the University of Iowa, and kind of lucked into, he was just the guy at the music shop. Really fantastic alto player. Played a lot in that Southeast Michigan, and did a lot of performing and recorded albums. And I know he went to Wayne State. I believe he also did degrees at University of Colorado Boulder and stuff like that. Uh, and I had a lesson with him, and he was talking about, obviously I was playing alto at the time, and he's primarily an alto player. And he was like, "Oh, have you ever heard of Cannibal Adderley?" And I said, "No." And he goes, "Oh, I'm gonna burn you a CD," which I remember being like, "Holy crap, burn a CD!" I could not have imagined, and he had one. I, did the whole thing. We waited for it to burn this whole thing, and it was Cannibal Adderley's "Then Dirty Blues." And I think he ended up having to make me more than one copy of that CD. I listened to so much. And and now I look back and it's kind of, maybe it's more of a commentary on the quality of burned CDs at the time, but it really was just, I just listened to that constantly. And I think I still have one of them, one of the copies, maybe the first one, I don't remember. But that was kind of, similar to what you were talking about. That was really the first, my core memory of like listening to somebody playing saxophone and being like, wow, that's it. And then, I played alto for a long time. I really didn't play, I don't think I started playing tenor until I was in college. And I had listened to jazz, very avidly since then. So that was probably sixth or seventh grade. Uh, and, my path's certainly a little bit different. I actually focused almost exclusively on classical music, playing classical saxophone. And I'd always listened to jazz, and it had always been something that was a part of it, but it kind of had a little bit of a disconnect, a little bit of a duality in my experience, because the people that were around me didn't play jazz. They were all classical musicians, whether that be a band director for a concert band or the person that I was studying with. Damani actually ended up leaving Michigan to pursue those graduate degrees I mentioned. And that was I think that was the summer before high school. So I kind of had this separation between this is the music I listen to and this is the music I play. Which in some ways, kind of every path is different. I think it kind of set me up for that when I was really, focused on playing jazz in college. I already had all the technical facility on saxophone, and I already had the language in my head. And so it really just became, oh, these are the notes to that. Oh, I should learn this solo in more than one key. Things like that, than really having to learn music and the instrument at the same time. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of that thing, and then because I was playing so much classical alto, I really switched to tenor because I wanted it to be separate from my alto playing. And then that led me to who I think is my foundational tenor player, which is, the best, my opinion, best to ever do it, or one of the best, which is Dexter Gordon. And he was really the person that kind of got me started into seriously studying, jazz tenor sax. So
Yeah, that's interesting. I I recently, so 2019, I finished my doctorate, and I think we finished our doctorate in the same year. That's right. Is that right?
yeah, same time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yours was probably during spring semester. Mine was during summer,
Ah.
2019, the summer. But anyhow, and when I went back to school, I hadn't played any classical saxophone for
Mhm.
14 years, and the degree was a saxophone performance. It was a classical degree. So
Mhm.
um so I got a different alto. I bought a different, I had a different strap that I'd only use with that, of course, set
Huh.
up and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
um because I really wanted to be different. And then the other thing that I did was I stopped playing like jazz alto as much, jazz and commercial
Mm.
alto, because I wanted alto to be like, this is going to be the classical horn. I want to
Yeah.
carve out that space in my mind. And
Hmm.
so that's an interesting thing. And it seems like that's a pretty common tact that folks that play both sides of the horn, as it were, take, is to say, okay, at least for a time, this is going to be just for this, and then this other horn, that's when I'll do this other thing. And
Yeah.
I think it's a uh, good way to create some clarity, because you have to develop like different um, muscle memory, and like
Hmm.
your concept of sound and stylistic, nuances and all this stuff. It's just a totally different thing. So
Yeah.
I was saying that Sonny Stitt was my influence, and I had some really great opportunities to perform with musicians that actually played with Sonny Stitt when I was young. And one of them, and he was the one that I played with the most, and he's actually on he's on one or two of my records actually, on my CDs, is Eddie Russ. Eddie Russ, great piano player. Um, and Eddie toured with Sonny Stitt for a couple years, and he's one of the only musicians that toured with Stitt, because we know that notoriously Sonny Stitt would just basically go from place to place and play with whoever was in town. It's one of the
Hmm.
ways that he was able to record so much. And one point of trivia is that the most recorded artist of all times, and it's not even close, as far as artists with records in their name, it's
Mm.
their record, is Sonny Stitt, and it's not even close. It's
Wow.
ridiculous. It's like the margin is like ridiculous between him and the next person. You would have thought it might have been Coltrane, or it might have been Miles, or it might have been, somebody like that, Charlie Parker, like that. No, it's not even close. Sonny Stitt. Now, it
Hmm.
makes sense because Sonny Stitt lived until he was in his 70s when he passed away.
Yeah.
Um, he was trying to, despite all of his efforts to end his life earlier due to alcoholism and everything. Um, but I had the chance to play with Eddie Russ, and I played with him all the time. And then also uh, Roy Brooks.
Hmm.
Roy Brooks, the drummer, the Detroit drummer, Roy Brooks, who played with Stitt. And he had a group called Roy Brooks and the Artistic Truth,
Hmm.
and that was a great band. And a lot of like guys came through that band. James Carter played in that band. J.D. Allen, I was in the band. Dwight Adams, Vincent Chandler, um, um, uh, Rodney Whitaker, Ali Jackson, like a heavy list of folks. Cassius Richmond. Um, there's a bunch of folks that I'm not saying too. I think Vincent Bowens was a Detroit tenor player. He was in that band. Um, so anyhow, I think Donald Walden might have been in that band at one point.
Hmm.
So anyhow, just a great opportunity to play. But Sonny Stitt, I was very influenced by Sonny Stitt, especially articulation and clarity.
Hmm.
And one thing that I notice is that even amongst like piano players, bass players, guitarists, trumpet players, trombonists, anybody, certainly saxophone players, that have a lot of precision and clarity in their playing, very articulate, rhythmically accurate, precise bebop vocabulary, Sonny Stitt.
Hmm.
They were at least influenced. Maybe not the main guy, but many guys, that was kind of their main guy, at least at some point. So Sonny Stitt, very influential, important person for folks to know about, and he gets sort of glossed over often because he was often compared to Charlie Parker, who he of course was influenced by, um, but he didn't really sound like Charlie Parker. In my ear, Sonny Stitt's more melodic than Charlie
Hmm.
Parker. And also, since he lived longer, um, he actually had stand that. But Charlie Parker invented the language, so that he gets most of the credit. But Sonny Stitt definitely refined aspects of Charlie Parker.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Actually, I think there's absolutely is something that's very important about innovating the art form, but I kind of see Sonny Stitt as someone who turned it into something that I think for a lot of people, and especially from a pedagogical standpoint, is a little bit more studyable.
Oh,
And a
absolutely,
lot of
100%.
time, you know, it's a lot easier to like access a Sonny Stitt solo. And a part of that is a playability thing. Sometimes, I mean, they're just as hard. But in addition to that, part of that I think is playing a more codified version of the language. And I use this analogy, and I again, and same thing as you, certainly mean it respectfully. But I think about like the first version of something. Sometimes I use an iPhone as the example. So the first iPhone was a big deal. That totally changed the game and what was going on. But they have refined that. It's still very, very similar to what it used to be.
Mhm.
And that is obviously very, very important. But it's kind of that idea that over time, and I think, and a part of that, I agree with you 100% is the aspect of lifetime. Sonny Sid has had a lot more time to refine his own craft. And so if we would have had as many years with Charlie Parker as we did with Sonny, it'd be very interesting to see where that would have gone, in terms of how he would have played and kind of would have worked on that stuff. So I totally agree with that. Sonny was for me certainly foundational, but maybe a little bit later. Like I said, because I started really on classical music, I didn't really start seriously studying jazz in terms of like, I'm gonna, you know, do transcriptions and this is my thing, really until I was about a junior in college. So comparatively very late in kind of like the normal timeline. But luckily, like I said, I already had a lot of the theoretical knowledge. Obviously had a lot of the basic skills with being able to physically play the saxophone and things like that. So I went from not really being able to uh, know much about jazz to, let me sight read through this Charlie Parker solo at a pretty decent, tempo. Maybe I'm at like 80%. And I have the physical ability and the knowledge to like read that stuff and understand what's happening. Um, and but for me, kind of the beginning of my jazz journey, thinking about other fundamental people for myself, Sonny Stitt's certainly on that list, and that was somebody that I did a lot in undergrad. Kind of a lot of, like I said, certainly has that core memory. And I later on, when I started playing alto, I just kind of stopped doing classical music and started doing jazz alto stuff. That was some of the first, I think. I went back to that Then Dirty Blues album, and I transcribed most of the solos on his solos on that album. Um, and but really, kind of the first person that I ever, when I got serious about studying, was Hank Mulvey, and specifically Soul Station, which is another foundational cornerstone, kind of whatever other analogy you want to call it, album
100%.
that I think is super important. And it's kind of an interesting, and I was just back at my alma mater, Central Michigan University, for their jazz festival, and we actually had James Carter was the University of the Festival guest artist, which was cool. So I got a chance to meet him and hear him play, and that was great. And he's obviously still very well known in the Detroit scene and stuff. And he got to play with the big band, a lot of positive stuff, and we got to play a little bit. So um, so when I was there, I mean, my teacher there was, like I said, 100% classical, and they have a really, really great director of jazz studies who runs that department, but he's the only jazz faculty member at the school. Um, and we were kind of actually reminiscing about this. I was so kind of in that classical vein. I wasn't involved in jazz band my first year of undergrad. So it really went from, not being in the big band to going on to grad school in jazz really quickly. It was quite the turnaround. Um, and so I really kind of gotten to the end of my interest and discipline and kind of whatever else you want to call it with classical music. Kind of culminated with, I attended a NASA conference, and I was, went for 3 days, 2 days. I really wanted to find a piece of music that I wanted to play. And a piece of classical saxophone literature that I was interested in. And I went to concerts all day for like 3 days, and there was nothing I wanted to do. And kind of in frustration, and there were some other factors too, part of this, I was like, well, what do I want to do that really make me happy? If I could do anything, what would I want to do? What would I want to play? What would I want to be a part of? Because I was kind of balancing it with maybe changing majors and maybe not doing music as a career. I had a lot of success as an undergrad in student government, and I was at the time I was doing a business minor, and I was like, well, maybe I do this, and that's kind of the field that my parents are in, and oh well, I don't know, I wasn't sure. I was kind of pretty disenchanted with it, and I had always like, oh, maybe I basically, literally, it's kind of hilarious to look back. It just had never occurred to me to try to play jazz. Just, it was always this two-sided thing where, this is the music we play and this is the music I listen to. And so that summer I decided to, totally using the brute force method. I wasn't taking lessons or anything. I decided to do all of the transcriptions on Soul Station on that album. And I have, these memories of spending hours, my parents are at work, I'm at home for the summer, of like sitting in my parents' basement. They had like, a sound system for the TV, and I had the CD on that, and, didn't know anything about slowing it down, didn't know anything about, certain way, strategies to transcribe. It was literally just, was that an A natural? No. Was that a flat? No. Was that F? No. Oh, it's E flat. Okay. I wasn't looking at chords. It was just, I joke about it. It was the brute force method. And I ended up doing that, and I was really kind of nervous going back to college because like I said, my teacher was purely classical. And so I went to this first lesson, and I had my tenor, which he was immediately like, what are you doing with the tenor? And I said, hey, I know you gave me all that music to learn over summer break. I didn't do any of that. And this is what I did. And he's silent, during it. And I played him the solo off of This I Dig of You, just kind of, on my own, just played it from memory for him. And it seemed like it was this, could have been 20 minutes. He was silent, just staring at me. It was probably 10 seconds. And it was, I look back, and it certainly was a pivotal moment. And he said, if you want to do this, then I expect you to be very successful at it. And I said, yes, sir. And then he was like, okay, well, you can go, like, if you're going to do jazz, I can't help you with that. And so then I ended up studying with the jazz professor and kind of working on that stuff, and kind of the rest is history in terms of making that thing. But I think it would have been easy for him to say, no, we do classical saxophone, you're still doing this, or maybe a part-time thing. And I think, he certainly gave me the rope to climb out or hang myself. And luckily I climbed out. And but yeah, so I think, it's kind of interesting to kind of, from my own pathway, because I think the people, from a listening standpoint, it was really Cannonball Adderley and Dexter Gordon, but from a study standpoint, it was Hank Mulvey, and it was that album. And I always come back to those solos. Some of the jazz saxophone students that we teach at the university are working on some of those transcriptions, and they're always great. And then I direct the hardbop combo here at the university, and our combo is doing that whole album. So we're doing a deep dive into the Soul Station album, and we're learning those tunes, and I'm having all of our students are doing some transcribing off of that album. All of the horn players are doing, obviously, Hank stuff, but the other instruments are working on transcribing things off of that record, and just getting into that style. Just because, in addition to obviously being great saxophone music, it's just good music. and that's kind of, the beginning of me studying. And then really quickly, I think that semester after that is the jazz person who's actually a trumpet player, but is actually a really great multi-instrumentalist. I've met people who think he's a bass player or think he's a saxophone player, stuff like that. And he was like, oh, this is great. Do you know Dexter Gordon? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And he was like, "Oh, you should do some of those transcriptions." So then I did all the classics. I did Cheesecake, and I did the Blue Bossa, Live Blue Bossa, and I did, plenty of other ones. And so that was right after that, but really kind of the genesis. And I'm kind of fortunate in some ways that I was old enough to really remember doing those things. But just how important transcription was, and obviously how important listening is just at a fundamental level,
Yeah.
to kind of doing those things.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, Dexter is so important too because he's sort of he's the forerunner, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
the uh, when you hear the way that tenor players their sound post Dexter, it's completely
Mm-hmm.
different. He was the first guy with that really edgy, pointed sound, and of course he was basically a direct transference of Charlie Parker.
Yep, he was on
Right?
stage with him. Yep.
Yeah, a direct transference of Charlie Parker, and often maybe we don't think of this, but I think part of his sound was that he was trying to capture an aspect of Charlie Parker,
Mm.
which Charlie Parker's alto sound was different than the guys before him. Dexter's tenor sound was different than the guys before him. um, Coltrane was a Charlie Parker clone playing alto, switched to tenor, and his first prototype was Dexter Gordon.
Hmm.
And he sounded more like Dexter than Dexter. You hear some of those early
Yeah.
recordings. Incredible how much he sounds like Dexter. You swear this has to be Dexter. No, it's not Dexter.
Hmm.
It is Coltrane. Um, and then there's I have this Prestige box set, Coltrane, and it's 16 CDs,
Hmm.
and it's all music that he recorded in a 2 year period of time, which is an incredible output. um, Mostly records in his name, but also records for label mates. um, but that's a really great box set. There's a lot of standards on there. It's a great thing to listen to if you're trying to learn standards. And that time period, um, Coltrane put a jetpack on his back. He had gotten kicked out of Miles's band,
Hmm.
um, and there's a big altercation and stuff, and it ends with Miles Davis smacking Coltrane, you know, and then and then he quits. He didn't quit. He got kicked out of the band.
Yeah.
So then, for that 2 year period of time, he was more disciplined than he had been previously. He's practicing insane hours. He joins Thelonious Monk's band. He's playing with Monk. There's that iconic, ridiculous solo that he takes on uh, the Thelonious Monk tune "Trinkle Tinkle" live
Hmm.
at at the five spot. It's ridiculous, totally ridiculous. But his playing really accelerates, especially technically during that time period. And
Hmm.
there's a few recordings in that box set where Train picks up an alto. He goes back and plays alto. Um, there's recordings with a young Freddie Hubbard in that box set, and of course, Freddie Hubbard loved Lou Donald. I'm sorry. What am I saying? Um, the trumpet player. Why?
Oh,
Why am I
Donald
spacing?
Byrd.
No, not Donald Byrd. Uh, this guy died because I think his girlfriend and his wife killed him.
Oh, Lee
Um,
Morgan.
Lee Morgan. Thank you.
Yeah.
Say that. Wait a minute. You were too fast. You were a little too quick. You knew that. You knew that story too well. Um,
I watched the Netflix documentary about it.
so, uh,
It's a
but
cautionary tale for all of us.
yeah, that's right.
Don't
But
invite your girlfriend to the gig.
Freddie loved Lee Morgan, and he sounded just like Lee Morgan on these recordings. And I'm saying that to say and going through all of this to say that that whole like picking a prototype and like really like leaning in on that prototype, that is a common path. That is a common path. And like I said, my initial prototype, um, as far as other players, other than my dad and his influence, was Sonny Stitt. It really was Sonny Stitt. And so uh, now, once I got to college, I really started leaning more into Coltrane. And I started to understand what was going on and identify with Coltrane in multiple levels. Um, Sonny Stitt, which was uh, great and could play in every key, and he had all this precision. And you know, Bunky Green told me this great story about Sonny Stitt. So there's that record. What is it? Sonny Stitt meets Bunky Green,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and so Bunky tells me the story. He says, "Look, um, I'm in the studio. I'm a young guy. I'm playing this record. About to play this record with Sonny Stitt. Sonny Stitt is like, the god of the saxophone. He's
Right.
like, and so he gets in the room. Sonny Stitt is in the corner, and he's playing like all this. He's getting warmed up, and he's playing all this stuff, right? And then every once in a while, Sonny Stitt would look over his shoulder, and then he'd see Bunky looking at him, and then he'd play even more incredible stuff. And that happened about like 4 or 5 times or something. Like it kept getting more intense. Like he's playing all this stuff, right? And that's a great story. But
That's hilarious.
I'll tell you, Stitt was known for, young musicians would always want to try to get up on the stage with him so that they could prove that hey, I have played with Sonny Stitt, like I have arrived. And he'd always do the trick where he would change the key.
Mm-hmm.
And a frequent one that he would do that on is Cherokee. So
Yeah.
Cherokee's in B flat usually, which makes the bridge in uncommon keys for the most part. But he would call it in B.
Yeah.
So you could say, hey, Cherokee in B, and then it'd be super fast. And of course, Stitt didn't seem to be limited by playing in other keys.
Mm-hmm.
And he frequently was playing in all keys, played blues in all keys, all this kind of stuff. Really, really terrific musician, but Stitt was not really like a great band leader kind of figure, right? Because he just would play with whoever. And so he didn't really develop a concept with the band. He just showed up. I can, cut anybody. Come on, bring it on. That was like his, like his whole gig.
Yeah, he was very much an individual. Yeah,
absolutely. Coltrane, on the other hand, and Stitt didn't write a lot of tunes. Now he wrote a couple really, tunes that are really critically important tunes, like Eternal Triangle, right? But
mm-hmm.
he wasn't really a composer, not significant composer. Coltrane was a composer of significance. He had a band concept, especially that classic
mm-hmm.
quartet. And he stayed with the same guys as long as he could, and he knew how to milk out of them exactly what he wanted. And he
mm-hmm.
sounded different when he played with different guys. He had a certain sound that he was going for. And in different time periods, he played with different guys because he was trying to get a different sound out of them, out of the band. And so I started to like lean in and start to identify and understand that sort of band chemistry type of thing, and tried to start to implement more of that into what it was that I was doing. There's all these stories about Coltrane practicing 12 hours a day and all of that. And so Coltrane became a very big influence. And when I was in college, another guy became an influence like immediately because he was influenced by the same guys I was influenced by. So my primary influences being Stitt and Coltrane, his primary influences being Stitt and Coltrane, and that's Kenny Garrett.
Hmm.
And Kenny Garrett was so influenced by Stitt that when he played with Miles, now what
Yeah.
obscures that, what obscures this is because Kenny Garrett plays all that modern harmonic stuff, right? Because he's also influenced by like Woody Shaw and these guys, right? And of course Coltrane, right? So he's like this. However, Miles frequently would tell Kenny Garrett, "Oh man, you sound just like Stitt. You sound more like you sound so much like Stitt." He would always tell him how much he would sound like Stitt. And it was interesting because I didn't perceive it because I was distracted by the harmonic vocabulary.
Mm.
But then when I started to listen to the precision in the articulation, I was like, this dude sounds just like Stitt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, it's one of these examples of really studying, getting close to a particular artist. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just sound like them. Right. But it's a good pattern.
Yeah, and there are certainly many ways that you can like, how do I say this? There's many ways that you can take inspiration or imitate or be influenced. It's not just harmonic language or just tone. And
Right.
so I definitely hear that, especially earlier recordings of Kenny Garrett. But yeah, and that lineage is certainly there. I was certainly heavily influenced by Kenny Garrett, probably less so just because I really wasn't doing a lot of alto, and so it was more of being influenced by his playing and just like listening to the albums and really enjoying that music. But not as much of like doing transcriptions. I've done some, but not as many as other musicians. But I think it's important to, and I think one thing I wanted to kind of reiterate that I think is important. Oh, excuse me. Is how important it is to be aware of the lineage in terms of, someone is influenced by the same people. Some of that is helpful with listening, is being aware of what goes on. Some of that is kind of understanding, I like this person, and, somebody who's, out playing and touring actively now. And then I can trace that back to, well, these are the people that I want to be listening to. And I don't necessarily want to study that person first. Maybe I want to take it back. Oh, they also listen to John Coltrane. Well, who did he listen to? Well, let me go back and kind of tracing that. And I have it over my camera's backwards. I have it over my shoulder. Where is this? There it is. The family tree of jazz. And I always love that infographic because it shows how all of these musicians are connected. It's obviously not based on influence, but it's kind of works on that chronology, and it shows how many things were going on at once. I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh, Duke Ellington, and then, that was over, and then now people are listening to this next person. And it was all the same, all of the same things were happening simultaneously. But I think that's kind of an important aspect of it. And not that you necessarily have to always be listening chronologically or studying chronologically, but I think having an eye on that and like, man, this person keeps coming up, they must be important. This person maybe less so, and then looking for those influences through language or through style with your own playing, but also with people that are currently on the scene and they're playing too. I think is really important. So.
Now, I'm just going to mention a couple things because we're getting close to our time. I'm going to mention a couple resources that people can access. There's circulating on the web. You can just do a Google search for the Jamie Aebersold Handbook or Jazz Handbook. And in there are a couple lists which I think are very useful. There is a list of historically significant recordings, and it's a checklist format. I'd encourage that, folks, if you're serious about jazz, to get a hold of that and just start listening. Just start listening to anything that's on that list. Just checking them. And, you know, I'm a fan of, buying jazz records and CDs and all that kind of stuff. But if that's not something that you can do, all of those recordings are probably going to be available on YouTube. They'll be available on Spotify in different ways. If you want to support the record company, because in most cases the artists are no longer with us, if you want to support the record company, the foundation, to whatever of the artists, if you want to do that, then you can. You can get on Apple, or I'm sorry, iTunes or whatever,
Yep.
and you can do it that way. But just get on there and just start listening. Just start listening. And when you find stuff that you like, make a note of it. Listen to it more than once. A lot more times than once. I think one of the problems that we have these days is that because we have access to so much stuff, the tendency is to be broad rather than to be deep.
Yeah,
And
I was going to say that.
you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice if you're going to be broad or deep. You can't do both. And so start with a couple records, get really, spend a lot of time with them and expand. But get that list and just start checking them off of that list. And also there's a list, artists by instrument, which I think is a helpful list. The list is kind of dated, and there are some artists that, I think are worthy of listening to that are sort of post that list. However, it's a good list to begin with. And you said something about artists, understanding like who they were influenced by and how important that is.
Yeah.
I think it's critically important because
Yeah.
often what folks do is they go to the end product and they just want to sound like the end product, right? So, for instance, this is a usual thing. You hear somebody like a Chris Potter, you're like, oh my goodness, Chris Potter is like totally ridiculous. It's incredible. And then, okay, I got to sound like Chris. I got to sound like Chris. And the thing is, it's funny, is if you were to talk to Chris, and I got a lesson with Chris when I was in my undergrad. If you were to talk to him, you know what he's going to say? He's going to say, don't listen to me.
Yeah.
Listen to Coltrane. Listen to Michael Brecker. Listen to, he's going to tell you, listen to Dexter. Listen to Sonny Rollins. Listen to Bird. Did you know that Chris was really an alto player and he switched to tenor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he started on alto.
Yeah, listen to all of the alto players that he referenced. Listen to Stitt. Listen to, and you want to go back as far as you can. Something else that happens frequently is the modern guys, they don't want to go back far enough. They don't want to go all the way back to the beginning. You got to start with Sidney Bechet, right? Sidney Bechet, and then you can start dealing with, Coleman Hawkins and Lester. And you can deal with Ben. You can deal with Paul Gonzalez. You can deal with let's see here, Don Bias. You can deal with, and Don Bias is an interesting character because he is sort of a tweener guy, where harmonically you hear him leaning towards more harmonically advanced. Well, I don't want to say advanced. I want to say
complex.
Well, complex, yes. So he's leaning more that way. So you hear him play like whole tone patterns and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But when you listen to his rhythmic concept, it's very much more of a pre-bop rhythmic concept. So you find all of these really interesting figures in the tradition. Here's one that people don't reference very often: Tina Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Tina Brooks. Folks don't talk about Tina Brooks. Folks don't talk about Johnny Griffin
Yeah.
as much, right?
Johnny Griffin's great. Yeah, I think they get overlooked because of their proximity kind of in the timeline sometimes, for sure.
Let's see here. Sonny Stitt's best friend. Sonny Stitt's best friend. You know who I'm talking about.
Who is that?
Um,
Sonny Stitt's best.
why can't I remember him? Remember his name right now.
Oh,
You know who I'm talking about.
I probably do. I can't think of the name though.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Oh goodness, Jug.
Oh, I don't know. It's too late in the semester for me to remember anything. You gotta look it up.
I gotta give us the name. Gene Ammons.
Yes. Oh
Gene
my god, I
Ammons.
feel bad not
No.
remembering that
It's
name.
man. There's a lot of names. We did pretty good. We remembered most of the
Yeah.
names, so we're all right. Um, but there's a long list of folks to deal with. Get started with somebody, spend time with them,
Mm-hmm.
and then start to travel along the lineage, and you can find all kinds of incredible things. You have any final
Absolutely.
words for
Yeah,
us?
and we could do a whole nother show on, people from the modern era that I think eventually will be, a part of that list. But I think it's important to have an eye on the chronological side of what we do for sure. So, well,
Yeah.
cool. Well, great to chat with you. I gotta get to a rehearsal myself. I gotta go listen to some people recreate the great music of Hank Moby.
All right. Well, that's all we got for the day. Everybody, please also go back and check out the first, what is it, 3 or 4 episodes of Tenor Talks.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be back next week with another riveting discussion. Peace.
Great. Thanks.
All right, now.